So, welcome to everybody on this rather wet and windy, dreary day. Certainly, it sounds like it's like that most of the country. Anyway, it's great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us for another of our Renew webinars. This one is an opportunity to sort of explore together rethinking children and family ministry in a time of change. So we're going to be unpacking that and giving opportunities for us all to contribute and to share experiences and challenges as we go through this time together. And to help me tonight, we've got Michelle Brown from Portobello and Joppa Parish Church, and she'll be sharing her experience in that congregation of navigating quite significant change, some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges. So I hope as you hear her story and experience that will be helpful to you. I'm just going to share my screen as we start with a short reflection. So the verse that comes to mind as we think about this topic of rethinking children and family ministry during these times of change is that lovely verse from Isaiah. The verse that reads, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland." So as we just reflect on that verse for a few minutes, I wonder, what are the hard, dry, discouraging, unfruitful, desert, wasted things that might come to mind in your personal situation and in your church? Where might those desert, hard places be? But then as we look at the other parts of that verse, it's a very dynamic, life-giving words in there. The new things, the springing up, the making a way, the streams of life-giving water. I wonder what streams you see in your situation, whether that's personal or in your church. And maybe as we explore this topic together this evening, we'll open our eyes a little bit more at seeing what God is doing already, at where He is already making a way, at how He is wanting to bring about change, new things, new life, and those streams of living water. Let us pray. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. Lord God, in our time tonight, we pray that you help us to open our eyes and see those new things. See what you are springing to life. See what you are bringing to our attention. Give us courage and give us hope as we look to the future in our contexts and in our congregations. In Jesus' name, amen. So I wonder, I think if we think back 10 years, that's kind of a chunk of time. I don't know how long, Stuart, you were in how long ago were you in Edinburgh? Was that 10 years ago or longer? Think about where you were 10 years ago, what you were doing, what was life like 10 years ago. And I wonder if in the chat you could just put in some thoughts about how society and culture was different. What did it look like 10 years ago? society. What did society look like? So just put any thoughts that come to mind when you think about what our country was like, what our villages, towns, cities were like, what our cultures were like 10 years ago. Just stick some words in then. Thank you. Wealthier. Yes, the whole digital thing has been a huge thing. Wasn't there at all, was it? No Google Maps. Pre-COVID, yeah. Yeah, fewer empty shops. Possibly less variety in the shops. Maybe we were less commercially money-minded in those days. I think it's become much more materialistic, haven't we? Yeah, yeah. Anything else about our sort of society and our world? More job opportunities. Yes, now we just want things instantly, much quicker, don't we? But less home shopping. Everything comes to us now instead of us having to go to it. Maybe we were less isolated. Maybe there was more of a stronger sense of community in those days. Yes, we had no idea that COVID would have such an effect across the whole world. That's interesting, Margaret. Did we appreciate people? Maybe we gave time to each other in a different kind of way because maybe we watched even less television those days. I don't know, because there was less on television. Yeah, Zoom has changed how we're able to communicate. Yes, we probably drank significantly less coffee and a bit more tea in those days. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Some of the stuff, how the culture, we've kind of become coffee drinkers and going out for coffee and stuff. About the same number of hairdressers. I like that. Yeah, okay. And if we ask that same question about children and families, the lives for children and families, we've mentioned the digital thing. That has massively changed, hasn't it? And affected children and families for good and for bad. What are other changes for the context for our children and our families? What do you just note things down in the chat?
Oh, Isabel, I distracted myself. What was your question?
Sorry, the question is what was life like for children and families 10 years ago? Yeah, fewer choices for children to get involved in. Sunday was more for church probably those days. Now it's changed and there's more activities on a Sunday morning. COVID disrupted regular church going. There's possibly quite a strong more of a family focus 10 years ago, would you say? And maybe that's dissipated a little bit these days. Anything else about 10 years ago, what things were like? Any other thoughts? Yeah, a lot about COVID. Yeah. And actually, since in more recent times, we've just had to stop many Sunday schools. Children didn't have their own phones. They didn't have social media. They went out to play and ride their bikes a bit more. Less pressurized, that's interesting. Social media, less influential. Fewer mental health issues. Yeah, yeah. All of those. I mean, I've got a silly bar. I'm trying to move, but if I move it, I change something. There we go. So we've kind of talked about the change, I think now, and if we look at what things are like now in society, would you say that we're more secular than we were 10 years ago? And I think there's quite a strong secular agenda that has a bit of an effect on us, on Christians and on the church and on our culture. Family life and patterns have changed in society. I think maybe 10 years ago, more people sat down around the table for their evening meal as a family. That possibly happens, even that happens less. Maybe more people sat and watched television together. And now it's much more, even if watching television, people are watching different things much more individually. I think family life has probably changed. Possibly more pressures on family life now. How do you feel education has changed? The curriculum has changed. Just speak out to anybody who feels, how has education changed over the last 10 years?
I was going to comment. It's interesting about the neurodiversity, the increased awareness of neurodiversity. I led an assembly last week at our local primary school.
Mm-hmm.
I usually ask what subject they're covering, what would they like me to talk about, and she said neurodiversity. We're doing neurodiversity this week. And I have to admit, I did have to look up neurodiversity to get, exactly the whole meaning of it. But so I did something very vague about that. But I noticed that the children all knew all about ADHD, dyslexia, everything. They were very, very well versed. And so they're far more aware of that than they would have been 10 years ago. They probably wouldn't have talked about that at all.
Yeah.
It really was quite a...
And that has definitely affected education. I think it's much more child-centered, much more individual needs-centered to try to, and looking at kind of making it the best it can be for every individual child. Thank you. Sunday, sorry, carry on. So I can't see everybody on the screen.
I was just going to say, I think there's probably a lot more disruption in the classroom.
Yeah, behaviour's definitely changed.
The teachers have far more to cope with. They cannot do individual as much as they want to.
Mm-hmm,
it's just not possible.
Mm-hmm. And so in a way, kind of behaviour and the influences on behaviour has, I think, had quite a big societal change and is a big challenge, really. And it's very much felt in schools, I would think. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's very true.
I think the school education system is very more interactive than it was, some period of time ago. Either the children interacting with the teachers and each other, in a group context, such as when I go in for an assembly, or interacting on their own with internet projects and research work that they're doing on their own.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that you might find that more in the high schools than in the primary schools, but I'm seeing it in the primary schools where I am, even though all my island primary schools are less than 10 children in the whole school, and I'm seeing them the whole P1 to P7 age range all at the same time, and sometimes nursery as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the other person who is speaking.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think that some children are starting school slightly less ready for school than they would have been some time ago, and partly because of COVID, language skills, social skills. And I mean, that may improve over the next few years, but I think that's been quite challenging for primary schools.
I think that's really true. And as you were talking, I was wondering whether there's actually been a change in society in parenting, whether parents are facing more challenges and difficulties and pressures maybe, and getting less support. I don't know. Maybe families are much more disconnected as well and often live further away from each other, so they may not have natural kind of family support in the way that people would have done in the past. Thank you. And I think one of the things we need to be aware of is how much education has changed and the world of children has changed. So as we're thinking about what happens with children in our churches, are we up to date in how children are learning and what their experiences are in school? Or are we thinking back to a bygone age, really, and expecting them to sort of sit still and be quiet and colour in a sheet or something? Sundays. Carry on, sorry.
Isabel, my sub-nursery school grandsons have been on their parents' phones and laptops since long before nursery.
Yeah.
At our drop-in this afternoon at the church, we had a 1.5-year-old who was given his dad's mobile phone to keep him occupied because all the rest of us were adults and he wasn't into it.
Right, and it worked, and he could do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But that means that if you give them, a piece of paper to colour in, they're going, "Oh, what's this? How do you do that?"
Yeah. I think in our kind of society, Sunday, the view of Sunday being special is no longer there. Sunday, well, maybe it is, but it's a day for sport, for shopping, for family, for parties, and it's not seen at all in the same way as it used to be seen, as Sunday was a day, the Lord's Day, and a day of rest and a day to go to church. Has been a big change, which has very much affected churches, I think. The place of the church, the significance, the role, the relationships, the connections of church has changed, probably more so in a city context than it might have done in a rural context. But the place of the local church and the recognition of that has changed. We've already mentioned COVID had a massive change for those 2 years, and out of that many things have continued to be either a challenge or have been we were forced into significant change during COVID. Let's just quickly go through the line of children, and then if there's other things you want to add, particularly on children, the lives of children now, what they look like. It's really, they're much, much busier. There's far more things to do, lots of options. It could be every night of the week they could be doing something. I was just talking to Michelle earlier, and her daughter's gone off to drama club, and parents are taxi drivers for this, that, and the other. But parents, sort of millennial parents, want to give our children all the best opportunities, and there's lots of clubs and lots of things that children can do and can enjoy that can be really stimulating and wonderful for them, but their lives can become much more busy than they might have been previously. We've talked, and thank you for those examples, about digital children from a year old. Children aren't intimidated. They've got far better skills in the digital world than many of us have. And there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of good things, but also a lot of challenges in that as well. Another thing I'm kind of noticing, maybe it's in relation to church and not other things, but there seems to be less of a willingness to join things, or people want to be less regular, but they don't want to commit so much. Maybe that's younger teens. I don't know whether it goes down to children, but younger teens, don't want to kind of commit to something and attend whether they like it or not. And even kind of volunteers and people in our churches are less willing, I think, to be regular. I think children are seeking in stimulation and entertainment much more, and at quite a fast pace. I think a lot of the things that happen in education and within families even are very much more focused on on children than they might have been in the past. And we've talked about increased awareness of neurodiversity. Are there anything else that we've not touched on? They may not be on the list, but we may have mentioned them. But is there anything else that's kind of changed in society or for children and families, if you like, that that we've maybe not mentioned just yet?
I think
I guess.
Sorry, the lady who spoke, you go first.
no, I was just thinking that family weekends are time for family, and it seems to me that our families want to be with the children at the weekend. They don't want them, whatever we're doing, they want to be doing it with them.
Yeah.
So doing things as a family for some people is really important.
Yeah. I think the other thing I thought of actually is that both parents might well be working these days. That might not have been the case 10 years ago. We were talking about that with some people last night, that they were saying, I think it was my house group, they were saying, well, my mother didn't work. She was always there when I came back from school. And how are you going to manage with a young family when both of you are working? How do you manage the holidays? So these days, society has changed. Both parents may well be working, and that changes family life and maybe makes weekends more precious in a way, as you've said, Margaret. Yeah.
Something
a 20 or 30-year thing rather than just 10 years.
Yes.
But the thing I was going to say, in the last 10 years, I think we pay for things much more on plastic cards these days, and very little cash use. And that affects us within church as well as in Sunday school, other gatherings.
One of the things that I've noticed is that certainly in the groups that I'm involved in, that the children that are more regular, or the families that are more regular, it's often a parent that English isn't their first language, or they've maybe come here from somewhere else, and that's been an interesting shift. There seems to be a different cultural attitudes to belonging to things.
And just awareness of a variety of different languages, a variety of different cultures.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And maybe when we're advertising, thinking about doing it perhaps a different way, because it might not, what we're saying might not be easily understood by.
Yeah. So how do we advertise and stuff? So let's just kind of quickly just talk about, okay, church, maybe 10, or maybe let's go back a bit further, as Stuart suggested. Maybe let's go back 20 years. Church. So Sunday, we've talked about, would have been much more likely to be a day when the family went together to church. And then what else might you have noticed in church? People would have been giving the offering in cash. Anything else in church? What would church have been like 20 years ago for those families? I notice in that picture, everybody's very smart.
I was going to say, everybody dressed up. You went dressed up to go to church as if you were going out.
Yep.
And I think that was around the point CH4 came in. So 21 years ago, we were definitely using CH3. So yeah, our hymn book language has improved a lot, and church music and songs has changed drastically over the last 20 years, especially if congregations have been able to stay up to date with.
That's very interesting. So music
writing
and songs would have changed and grown. There probably would have been an organ in most churches, possibly a choir.
And the likes of Fishy Music and other ministries producing much more lively, child-friendly songs that we can use, from today's technology.
These children in this picture would have gone off to the Sunday school in the wooden hall round the back.
That looks 100 years old. That one.
It does.
I was just about to say that.
However,
my children were wearing jeans to church easily 20 years ago.
Good.
I don't think clothing's changed, but that is about definitely 100 years.
Yeah, good on you. So, the children would have gone off to Sunday school. There would have been more children in Sunday school. They might have stayed in the service at the beginning. There might have been might have been or still be a children's talk. And what else? Anything else that church might have been like? What have I got here? There was the separation Just need to move something. Separation to Sunday school. Children worship. So children go off to Sunday school and the adults have their worship. There probably were more children and families going together to church, and now it's largely, well, it's much more skewed to older people and fewer children. The Church of Scotland tradition is very wordy. It's a big thing, isn't it? The sermon. And when you call a minister, they have to prove themselves that they can preach a really, really good sermon. So, you know, there's a long sermon. It's probably a fixed time for the service. People attended weekly. Would you agree in some ways it was fairly non-participatory? You sat in your pew, you stood to sing, you sat down, you listened to the sermon, you listened to the prayers. I'm sure that varied a bit, but it was fairly passive in some ways. So a little bit more formal. I think some places it can still be very formal. Somebody was telling me about communion Sundays still being very, very formal in some places. So then if we come to today, what's church like now? And I'm sure that varies a lot across different places, but how might you describe church now? Stuart, you've mentioned fishing music, a greater variety of different types of music for people of different ages to maybe engage with, yeah? And a bit of consideration about engaging everybody together. Yeah.
I think Lynn made a comment that there was no tech before, and now there's certainly congregations are keen to get tech in when they can, screens and other things, which really helps the singing and lets you use more modern stuff because you can go outside the hymn book.
Yeah, absolutely. Another conversation I was having today is that pretty much every church would use PowerPoint in some way. So we as Church of Scotland, are we helping people providing PowerPoints on different things, or just leaving people to expect them to put it together? Are there things that we need to be doing? So yes, so there's screens, there's digital, there's looking up from the book, isn't there? It's less driven by a book in some ways. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Sunday school.
Friendlier and less stuffy.
Ah, nice. Friendlier and less stuffy. Yeah.
And there's fewer children there.
Yeah. Fewer
but
children.
They're there because they've chosen to be there largely, rather than because they have to, because that's what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point and a good distinction. Yeah.
We have 3 Ukrainian families coming to our congregation who are hosted by people of our congregation, and it's one of their children is the only child that comes to our church on a regular basis for the actual Sunday services. And we have a messy breakfast that happens once a month. That's much more crafty and in the hall, and even less formal than a normal church services. And there's a few children come to that, but they don't come to our Sunday service.
Mm-hmm. So that's picking up that in our churches, and you're in quite a rural situation, so it's wherever our churches are, we may well be getting people from different backgrounds and different nationalities, different languages coming. And then the other thing you've mentioned there, Stuart, is we might have different types of services. We might have a monthly family service. We might have a messy church. We might have a communion service. We might have the sort of standard morning service. We might have a youth
cafe
service.
Church.
We might have a cafe church. So there's kind of much more sort of freedom somehow to have all sorts of different services. Would you say that more people are actually involved in the services, including children and young people and parents, might have a role, might contribute in some way? So there's more people involved in leading services, would you say, these days?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say our church, definitely there's more people involved because the ministers are so thinly spread. Other people have to do things that maybe would have been traditionally done by the minister. So definitely more people are involved in things.
Yeah, thank you. Right, let's see. So children and families come together. Somebody mentioned earlier that families want to stay with their children. And previously, you go together and you leave together, but the children would go one way and do one thing, and the adults would go another way and do something different. And now there's much more thinking about children together with their families. A lot of churches are now don't just talk about children's ministry, they're also talking about what are we doing for whole families. When we think about baptism, we're doing stuff for the whole family. And even in our worship, how do we help families worship together or study the same passage so that when they go back to have lunch together, you hope they might talk about the same thing, about what they've been learning together, so that it becomes an experience for the whole family rather than separated out. But I think there's a lot more, even like sort of thinking about messy church is church for everybody together. We've talked about the variety of worship experiences. We haven't mentioned very much, but we will later, about things being done much more intergenerationally. It doesn't matter so much all the different separating people out according to different ages. Are there things, if we are coming together as the body of Christ to worship God, how can we be that body of Christ worshipping God to get really together with different people, even if for some things we separate out and do things separately? And that may not need to happen because of age things. It may be some people like to sit and listen to a sermon. Other people might prefer to engage with the Bible in a different kind of way. So there may be the beginnings of really starting to think, how can we be the body of Christ together, all ages together?
Isobel, I was really challenged by that. I think our church is quite used to worshipping together with all ages, and babies can be crawling around and or toddlers running about, and there's a general feel of welcome for everybody, irrespective of their age. Having said that, I went to a church recently when I was on holiday, and it was much more liberal than that. People were coming and going in and out of the service at different times. They just, with cups of coffee, they would come in halfway through. There were teenagers appearing, and there was boxes of things for people to help themselves to occupy yourself if you were a child that needed, or somebody that needed that. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought we were quite progressive. And then I thought it challenged me because I was quite distracted from the service. And I thought that is good to get into these situations to realize, you don't realize how stuck in your ways you are until you go somewhere different.
I think that's a really good point. I think, Lynn, we've often visited other churches more than we might have done in the past. And we're aware that different denominations and different churches, and even within the Church of Scotland, there's lots of different ways of doing things. Whereas before, I think we used to be very fixed in how everything had to be. So I think there's a lot of it's an opportunity, isn't it, to think about doing things slightly differently, maybe regularly or just occasionally. There may be opportunities. Stuart, you wanted to come in?
I wanted to say a wee bit about your picture there on the left, which shows male-female couples with their children. Whereas we have a lot of families now that are split and divided and changed. And I think that's been quite a significant change over the last 10, 20 years of families splitting up and reforming much more than they were. And even having gay couples that would have children that might well bring them along to our activities.
That's a
And
very significant one, and we should have mentioned that in the previous slide, really, because I think that is a very big one that we need to recognize. Yeah, the makeup of families is very, very different now.
So
Yeah.
that just occurred to me, and so I thought I should
thank
mention
you.
it.
Thank you. I think also when we think about church, we don't just think about church on a Sunday morning as much anymore. I think maybe in the past we thought much more church was Sunday morning church, but now I think we're thinking church could be all those different types of worship times, but there's other dimensions of being church that we are, I think, a lot better at now. Other dimensions of encouraging that belonging, the different groups that make up church, the different relationships and contacts that people have with each other, sometimes in the church building, sometimes outside the church building. That's all still church. Would you agree that that's something that we have a broader view of church now than we might have done in the past? Would you think that's fair?
I think it's less about the building and more about the people today.
Yeah.
Whereas if a lot of before you would just, if the church was a building, a physical thing, whereas I think we're much freer and more open to explaining to people that actually it's about the whole body of people, not about which building you're doing it in.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And maybe Lynn, your example was this, it's not a fixed time. It's not, Stuart, you mentioned cafe church or messy church might not be a Sunday morning in quite the same way. There could be different ways. I think there's much more participation, much more involvement in our church life and in our church services. I'd say we're more experiential than educational now. Previously, particularly for children, you went to Sunday school, you learnt about the Bible, you learnt Bible stories, you learnt Bible verses. Now I think it's much more experiencing. Yes, you're learning, but you're learning in an experiential way, both adults and children. Any thoughts and comments on that?
I think we have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The Bible stories the kids love.
Yeah.
They relate to, they come back to them, it means something. And I still think, intergenerational church is great, but kids still love to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they can do more things together, they can talk more freely, they can have games, they can do more things. So I think we need to have diversity of worship.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really important.
And opportunities to come together, but also opportunities to do things in different ways. And I think, yes, it's all about the Bible, but I think you've just given examples. It's not there's a variety of different ways of engaging and understanding the Bible that are more experiential, that can help people grow in faith in some way. Yes, Stuart.
Yes, yeah, I think it's also important that the experience of God is becoming a more critical factor these days. People, I wouldn't say evidence of God, but people's experience of God actually doing stuff in their lives. Things, being in the right place at the right time, or praying to God and God feeling that God's helped us. Being able to share those experiences with each other, even within our worship services, so that it's not just a case of what happened 2,000 years ago, but it's about what God's doing now in our communities, in our lives.
So it's experiential of God rather than learning about God. Yeah.
Well, not rather than, but as well as.
As well as, yes. And the important thing is about sharing it as well, talking about it, sharing faith together. Thank you.
We've introduced a good news time at the beginning of our services, so people can talk about something that's not a difficult thing, but an easy thing, but it's called God news. So it's about what good things are happening, what's God doing in our lives, and we have a question time at the end to help with that interactiveness within our services.
That's a great thing to do, and kind of with that expectation that God is there for all of us, and we've all got a story to share and opportunity
that
to share it.
It's in everything. So whatever anybody wants to ask or question about, there must be some relevance to God in that.
So I think we talked a bit about, it's not just about Sunday morning, and it's not just about church building. It's in and beyond both of those. I think there's a lot more working together with others, working together with other churches, other denominations. A lot of the change that we're facing at the moment, where churches are having to grow into hubs, go into unions. A lot of, that can feel quite hard, quite challenging, quite painful, but there's opportunities in that working together with others that you can get a bit more help, you can do more things together, you can gather more people together. So there may be benefit in some of that working together. The other thing I'm aware of is, I think since COVID, it's harder to get volunteers and people to be willing to help sometimes. And the volunteers that we have are often older. I don't know if that's your experience as well, and a change in that. And maybe we have to just not put the same people under more and more pressure, but just do a little bit less. That's okay. And maybe that's the new thing that God's calling us to do, is to maybe just refocus what we do, let go of a few things and do some different things, or do some of the same things separately. Let me just, I think I'll stop sharing at this point. I'd like now just to kind of talk a little. I'm going to put you into groups in a little while, and you can start to share a little bit more about some of the things that you've started to see changing as our context and our church and our society and our children have changed. But I wanted just to talk briefly, asking you, what's the purpose? Why are we doing, what do we want to achieve through connecting with children and families? What's the purpose? Why do we do this?
Can I say, I mean, you talked about wastelands and things. On a bad day, I think purpose is very much about providing as stimulating and as meaningful an experience of church for children and families, for those that want to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm getting very much older, and, there are still families coming who want to come, and, I'd like to provide it for as long as possible. But that isn't, I realize, on a good day, I realize that's not enough. So I suppose that's why I'm here partly. But sometimes I feel my purpose is almost reduced to just having new ideas, yes, but just to keep it alive, and to keep it alive for the people who've indicated they want to come.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do more than that. I'm not, that's a bad day.
And that's your purpose. But
yes.
The question I'm asking is, for the church, what might our aim be for wanting to connect with children and families? Why might we, as church, want to do that, or think that that's important?
Well, I suppose that's really what I mean, is that in the most limited way, it is about the people who want to be there to provide something for them. But I realise that's very limited.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's on some of those days of discouragement and wasteland, yes. Anybody else got any thoughts? What do we want to offer? Why do we do this? What's God calling us to in terms of connecting with children and families?
I feel that it's a personal response to the good news that I know, and it seems that it's a natural thing to do to have churches providing we've been talking about the families looking for things to do. They've got inquisitive children. They're seeking, they're questioning things. And it just seems right that we've got a voice, that we can breathe some of what we've learned of God and how much He loves them into that.
So there's something about sharing faith, sharing God's love.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep.
Sharing values.
Sharing values. Yep.
Introducing them to Jesus.
Yeah, introducing them to Jesus. Martin, were you going to say something?
That's what I was going to say. I think it's about the relationship, and the first relationship is the relationship with Jesus, and for us to be sitting with the best news that any of the people in our parishes could ever hear or know, and so few of them are hearing it. And so, I think that's the stimulus for why we would be trying to engage with families. And the disappointment is always the many families that we don't engage with. And, in our society nowadays, we know that if we're not telling them that Jesus loves them and that He's got a purpose for their lives, probably nobody else is.
Yeah. And kind of it's even just showing them that love as well. It's kind of sharing God's love with the hope of helping them to grow in faith and to grow as disciples, but also just showing love to those around us is kind of really important. And that's not just for the adults, but it's for children and families as well. Stuart?
I think, I guess from schools, we start teaching our children in the primary school because there's so much to learn. And so I think that applies to Christianity as well, about God, is that the sooner you start, the more you learn, the better you learn. But also, in terms of families, I think church offers an ability for families to connect and do stuff together in a way that schools don't, in a way that many other organisations don't that are set up for children, because the parents aren't able to be involved in many of those. And so that's one of the things I think it makes our messy breakfast and other messy church things a success. It's because parents are encouraged to come along with their children and do stuff together, and with the other families as well. And we want people to know God as being our Father and us all being in the family of God, one big family. And so that's why it makes sense for us, to encourage families to relate to each other together.
And there's something about what you mentioned earlier, Stuart, about that experiential thing, about people experiencing God's love through us sharing it and being part of that loving community of faith-filled people.
And clearly most of the facilitators are volunteers. So people that come, that are not otherwise connected with the church, they're going, why are these people doing that and doing this and giving us this good opportunity to do whatever good thing it is they enjoy coming to do? Creates that question as to why we're doing it.
And I think as we sort of look at what we're doing and who we are as church, I think it's important to think about what we do and why we do it, and to keep that in mind. And I think in COVID, we had to stop everything and start very, very different things, and then restart some things and let some things go, because we absolutely had to, because of COVID. But I think it's good to have times when we just stop and reflect on what we're doing, and is it really working? Working's the wrong word, really, but is it the best thing we should be doing to share God's love in the way that He's called us? Is it the best thing that we could be doing for the people in our communities and in our churches? I think maybe the example I would give is some people have a terrible sense of guilt that the Sunday school is now 3 children, and they're ploughing away keeping that Sunday school going. And maybe it's better to say, let's just stop it and let's think about something very different that might work better for those children and maybe some others. Or maybe let's stop thinking about Sunday school and feeling bad that we've lost all these children and start a messy church. But maybe there's times when we need to go back to the why we're doing what we're doing and why, and think, might there be a new stream in the desert? Might there be something different? Might there be something we need to stop so that we can start something new? So I'm going to pop you into groups. We've had some examples in our discussions already about new things that people have been doing already. And I'd like you to talk about this question, which is coming up in the chat, is how can we be more effective? And again, effective, I'm not quite sure is the right word, but how can we be more effective in our purposes, our aims, our God-given aims to share God's love, to share faith, to grow disciples, to welcome and encourage belonging in the family of God? Are there new things that we can do or that other people in your group might be doing that help that sharing and that growing of faith? So you've heard some examples in the group together, but maybe you can share some examples amongst yourselves of how new things that we can do. And that might mean stopping some things. But how do we encourage belonging, sharing faith, and growing disciples? Okay, you've got 10 minutes. I hope you've had some good discussion and seen some good streams and deserts and heard of new things. We'd already shared some great ideas already, but I'd like to now invite Michelle to share a little bit about what's happened in Portobello Joppa in terms of navigating some change, particularly change that relates to children and young people being fully part of the church. So Michelle, over to you.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Michelle Brown, and I've been working in Portobello and Joppa now for 14 years in children's and youth ministry for the Church of Scotland, originally for St. Philip's and then for Portobello and Joppa Parish Church when we formed a union with 2 other churches about 10 years ago. Now, like so many churches, we have seen the decline in numbers over the years, most notably since 2012, when the number of baptisms and weddings dropped significantly at our church. And since then, our ministry team has spent a lot of time discerning our next steps along the way with our Kirk session. We participated in the Future Focus just after our union to help our new Kirk session discern the next steps in our expanded parish. And this was a program that was led by Rob Rawson through the Church of Scotland. Then in 2019, we took part in Growing Young through a cohort of Scottish churches working alongside a team from the Fuller Youth Institute. And they shepherded us through a 2-year discernment process to think about how change could work and how to grow young as a church. And this turned out to be quite timely as we began the process just before lockdown. Now, the pandemic brought on so much change that actually coming out of lockdown, there was more of a willingness from our congregation to try new things, since what we'd always been doing actually hadn't been happening for a very long time. And society is changing and families are changing. So to be inclusive and welcoming to the children and young people and their families, we as a church have to be ready to adapt to the change as well. And this doesn't happen overnight. It isn't a one size fits all for every church. It takes putting together a team of people from as many generations as you can represent from your church family, and then taking that time to pray together, look at scripture together, and share ideas and hopes for your church family. And then through the discussion and prayer, discerning the next steps. But change isn't just changing programs or worship styles or times. It's a cultural change for the whole church family. And it's helping everyone of every age to come to see the common purposes for our church. So why are we gathering on a Sunday? How are we connecting and supporting each other throughout the week as a church family? How are we growing in faith and our walk with Jesus? And how are we sharing that faith outside of our building? And getting everyone ready for making big changes takes a bit of trial and error. Growing Young calls this the experimenting on the edges. So our team looked for ways to make small changes to include younger generations in leadership, to provide space for warm relationships across the generations to grow, for our congregation to be the best neighbors we could be in our community, to empathize with our young people, to share Jesus' message more effectively, and to plan every aspect of our church's life, keeping in mind how our young people could be included. And the research of Fuller Youth Institute found that churches across denominations who prioritized those key things were the ones who were growing and seeing growth in the younger and often missing generations. So in our church, this meant starting up an eco group led by some of our young people. And it also meant rethinking our social events to start at a time when younger families could actually attend, not at bedtime. We then met with young people from our youth group and our young adults group to gain their insights on what they thought was missing from church and what they were hopeful for. And this led to rethinking our worship offering post-lockdown and moving towards a regular offering of informal and intergenerational worship. So pre-pandemic at PJBC, church looked like this. We had a 9:30 communion service while the Breakfast Club, our youth group, met in the hall. And then at 11 a.m., the traditional family service was offered, with children starting in worship and then going to the halls around 20 minutes into worship for Sunday Stars and for Crash. And we had two distinct worship services where people worshiping at those separate times rarely crossed paths in the building. Our youth group went home by 10:30, apart from one young person who wanted to stay in for worship. Families with young children would rush in for the start of worship at 11 a.m. Children would either take themselves to the halls mid-service or their parents and carers would quickly drop them off and then run back up to the church before the hymn finished. After church, few families stayed on for coffee to build relationships with each other, as it was lunchtime and there were sports or activities to get to. We lamented as a Kirk session that we had a really strong youth group, but that our youth group didn't choose to join us for worship. Many people wondered where the teenagers were, but they just weren't in the building at the same time as them to know. And when our young people graduated from youth group, we didn't see them back on Sundays at the church. We actually started another youth group, a young adults group called BC 2.0 for this reason, because they still wanted community. They just didn't feel they belonged on a Sunday morning. So this young adults group met midweek once a month. But in the pandemic, this changed too. So once we were in our own homes and we were stuck at home, our young people really wanted to connect more often. So our young adults group, our 16 to 25-year-olds, met every week on Zoom. These Breakfast Club graduates who formed the group were actively seeking connection to their church family. Relationship and belonging were so important. Our children's ministry went on Zoom. We had full godly play sessions for a whole year, and then we moved on to other things as well online. The parents joined their children on the godly play Zooms. What was once just for the children became an intergenerational ministry, with parents taking part with their children, opportunities to continue to wonder and to respond to the Bible stories that were more recognized from parents as they had a shared experience to keep talking about together during the week at home. At one point, a family sent me a video of their child telling the story of the exile and return on the beach using shells and sticks. And the mom was amazed at how much her daughter had this big story, and she could recognize the same story I told online the Sunday before. So intergenerational ministry was helping to support faith nurture at home as the conversations continued. Now, in order to free up the parents to be able to go also to the online worship, which both had been offered at 11 o'clock at that point, we moved our children's ministry Zoom to 9:30 in the morning. And as we came out of lockdown, we actually found that this earlier timing worked better for families since the children were up early anyhow. And now it finished before they were hungry at lunchtime and in time to go out and do other things as we came out of lockdown. So this change also meant that we had to move our youth group time from previously 9:30. And now instead we Zoomed at 11:30 with our teenagers. And our young people appreciated a later start as they could sleep in and have their breakfast at their actual breakfast time of 11:30. When we went back into the building, our ministry team decided to shake things up. Why go back to what we did before when there was space to try something new? And after a couple trial periods of different styles of worship, we settled into a new worship pattern that we call rolling church. Now, with rolling church, you can go to one or more of the 3 service offerings. You can mix and match, change it up from week to week. Meanwhile, there's tea and coffee on offer in the main hall from 9:30 to 12. So we're a bit like that church that Lynn described from her holiday. You can grab your coffee, you can bring it with you anywhere in the building, and it's totally acceptable to do that. At 9:30, there is a 30-minute quiet and reflective worship in the church. In the halls, we offer Sunday stars during the term time, and then godly play sessions during the school holidays. And this is for nursery to primary age school children. There is a creche currently on offer then as well. So parents and carers have a couple options. They can either drop off their children in the halls and then go to a quiet half-hour service, followed by 15 minutes of coffee and tea before coming back to pick up their children. Or they can drop off their children and go to the Rolling Cafe for 45 minutes of uninterrupted coffee and tea and talking to other adults. So they've got choices there, which is lovely. At 10:30, our informal, interactive, intergenerational half-hour service begins. Now, some of the families at this point go home because the parents and carers have been to worship and the children have been to children's ministry. Some parents and carers who went into worship at 9:30 pick up their kids and go back into the church for a second service with their children to worship together because the service styles are so unique. You can go to more than one and it's not so repetitive. The children the parents rather, who've been enjoying their fellowship time and peer support time in the main hall with their coffee and teas, now go into worship with their children. And this is the case as well for 3 of them. I was going to say that there are other families who only come for that 10:30 worship service. They don't come prior to that. They just come for that half hour. And this is what happens for 3 of our families who have creche age children. So actually the creche that we've been offering at 9:30 is becoming more irrelevant because parents seem to prefer staying with their children more post-pandemic and not really wanting to drop them off in the creche. And this is also perhaps because we're much more inclusive of the infants and toddlers in our worship offering. Now at 11:15, our traditional worship begins, and this lasts for 45 minutes. The change here is that it's no longer an hour, it's 45 minutes. It starts quarter past, not at 11. And the biggest change, though, is that there's no longer a children's address, and most families have actually left the building by then, having already been to coffee, Sunday stars, and worship. So meanwhile, our youth group starts at 11:30 still, with breakfast rolls and faith discussions in the small hall. Now, our young people in the Breakfast Club have also created different Sunday morning patterns as well. So we have 5 young people who help at Sunday Stars from 9:15. They attend or help lead worship at 10:30, and then they stay on for youth group until around 12:30. There are other young people who come at 10:30 with their families to worship and then stay on for the youth group. And some of them help with AV or the band or various things in worship too. And then we still have a couple of young people who are having that good long sleep in, and they sleep till about 11, roll out of bed and come down for their bacon roll and join us for youth group at 11:30. Sometimes one of them will get up very, very early and go down and help serve the tea and coffee with his mom at the Rolling Cafe. With the rolling Sunday schedule, adults and young people can pick and choose what worship styles and times work for them, alongside the social time at the Rolling Cafe, and potentially attending children's or youth ministry opportunities. There's also adult Bible study groups during the week, so there's educational opportunities at various points in the week, which is lovely. There's more crossover of people from the different worship times now that we have that Rolling Cafe. And relationships for the parents and carers have really strengthened with the extended, uninterrupted conversation over coffee. Our youth group are more invested across the morning with volunteering and with worshiping. And before pandemic, we had 1 young person at worship, and now we regularly see 10 young people attending or helping to lead parts of our 10:30 and intergenerational worship. The young person who attended pre-pandemic still attends and helps to lead as part of the worship team at the 11:15 traditional service. The informal interactive nature of our 10:30 worship also means that families who have neurodiverse children are attending more often, as there's freedom of movement throughout the service. People come in late and they leave early as they need to. People knit and play with fidget toys. There's baskets around our church of those as well. Children and adults that need to move can get up and move when needed. There's a lot less pressure as a parent to feel as though you need to get your child to sit still and be silent for the full service. And this is a big cultural change in worship. And it's noticeable, and it's a noticeable difference at our 10:30 service from the other worship times that we have. The other two were not as informal, just that 10:31. But it has meant that we've been able to include and welcome in a couple families who have not felt as at ease in our church for worship before the pandemic. A couple other adaptations, part of the service is that the reflection, a couple other adaptations within the service are as reflecting upon the things that the young people have said to us in our interviews with them, our chats with them. So now the service is only 30 minutes long. The sermon is a short interactive reflection. The ministers who take turns leading the service often include an opportunity to talk to someone sitting by you, to think about a question asked, or there might be a roving microphone for anyone to answer questions or chat with the minister in conversation on the reflection. My son and one of his friends have been known to pop their hand up in mid-reflection with a comment or an observation that thankfully Stuart learns take on board, which is great. And this is completely reflective of how our young people have experienced church so far in the halls, at children's ministry, at youth group, and indeed reflective of how they are taught in schools as well. It is collaborative learning and discussion. The sermon at this service is really a starting point. The ministers get the conversation going, which leads to further reflection, discussion at youth group or at home with your family, or perhaps unpacking it a bit more at a Bible study in the week. Now, in addition to the interactive reflection, I lead an interactive prayer as part of the service, and we do this each week. But we alternate the style of this prayer to use different spiritual styles, with some prayers being action prayers, some drawing on emotion, or using symbols, or they might be word-based. And for more information on these spiritual styles, which are based off of the work of David Sinos, have a look at the webinars that Darren Phillip did for the Church of Scotland during lockdown and just after. Isabel will send out links for those in the follow-up email. They're really excellent webinars. Now, also, if you haven't already got this book, go and buy a copy of this book. You need this book on your shelf. You need to read it and read it again and again. It's brilliant. Susie Farron and Darren Phillip have written a fantastic book on being an intergenerational church. And their work is inspired, and it's so helpful for any church that is rethinking what we do, why we do it, and the best ways forward to journey onward as an intergenerational church family. I literally cannot recommend that book highly enough. It's phenomenal. And if you ever get a chance to hear either of them speak about it, totally worth your time. And interestingly, the three families who are coming for a baptism so far this year have all opted for our 10:30 worship service. The informality of it makes it a more comfortable fit for family and friends from outside the church who will visit on the baptism day. And also the earlier timing of the service means that the baby, the toddler, or the child coming for baptism is not approaching a nap time or lunchtime. And so they're much happier for someone to put water on. We found anyway. In addition to all this, by providing a time of worship for all generations to worship together, we're slowly building more connections across the generations, especially when in worship, we take that time to talk to each other and pray for each other. And around half of our 10:30 congregation actually comes to the service without children with them, without any grandchildren or children. They come because they want to be there as adults. And there are 5 generations represented most weeks in that 10:30 congregation. And for me, though, the main highlight of taking a leap and making these changes is that our young people are much more included in the full life of the church. We're not wondering where they are anymore. They are there, and their voices are heard at committee meetings, and they are volunteering more, and their ideas are shaping our future. And we're only heading into our third year now of Rolling Church, and change takes time. In Growing Young, they say to think of change as a slow cooker rather than a microwave. However, we can start to see how it's all coming together through the stories shared of people's experiences and what church means to them. And indeed, we've had some people join the church since then, so that's really exciting as well. So I'm going to close with one of the stories of the way things have been changing, I suppose. And this is one of our young people who volunteers in children's ministry and the worship team. And she's also a very talented dancer. And her big dance show was scheduled for a Sunday, so she wasn't going to be able to attend church on that day. However, the show was unfortunately canceled due to some theater problems. And that morning, the young person unexpectedly turned up very early to help at Sunday Stars, stayed to worship, and then stayed through youth group, still chatting with friends after it had ended. She was there from 9:30 to 1 that day. And I said it was great to see her that morning, as I knew she was meant to miss it. And she said, I was sad this morning when the show was canceled, and I wanted to be somewhere I knew I'd be happy. So as a church, we are striving to share faith with each other, to grow in faith, and to provide a space to belong. And we do stumble along the way. Some of the things we try, not for everybody, but we do our best. But on that day, for that young person, we got it right. And so with God's guidance, I pray our church will continue to discern the best way forward as a church family. And I pray for all of you as well in your ministry with your churches to renew children's and youth ministry too. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for sharing that story. And it's a lovely example of the slow cooker of change, but also the intentionality, the working together with the leadership, the listening to everybody in the church, including young people, maybe listening to people who maybe aren't in the church, the wanting to be a welcoming place and place of belonging, the willingness to experiment and provide different types of things for different people, but to recognize the need for relationships across generations as well. It's a whole load of different stuff that's been simmering away, but that you as a whole church have been working in. And I know it's not all been easy, but that's a wonderful story to finish with. And you'd hope that every person from every generation would be able to have that kind of story from their church. Just in our last 5 minutes, I wanted to ask if anybody's got any questions or observations or comments about what Michelle's shared, or any other examples of where you're seeing streams in the desert or things that you could change that wouldn't be difficult to maybe bring in. I mean, I was very struck, Stuart, by the 2 examples you gave. So that in the beginning and the end of a service, you give people an opportunity to speak. Now that could be everybody, and children, young people can contribute into that just as much as everybody else. So that's a really wonderful, kind of very easy thing to add in and to encourage people to share their faith with each other. So has anybody got any questions? Sorry, Stuart, go ahead. You need to unmute.
I was just wanting say that I'm kind of daunted by the fantastic developments that you've done there, Michelle, as a team, and it makes me realise how dependent even an enthusiast is, how dependent an enthusiast is on gathering other people around them to include them in what you might be able to do and to help them to learn how to do these things, a sort of discipleship training thing. And I think, having 3 services on a Sunday morning, that would be fantastic. But I struggle just to do the one good one that's traditional but varied, through its whole pattern. And I guess you have to focus on what you can do and not be anxious about what you can't do.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely need to think about your own context and what will work in the space that you have. And we've managed it thus far, but we had a minister and an associate minister, and our associate minister is not part of our presbytery plan. So he will soon be moving on. And when he does, we'll need to definitely call on the elders to really step up and support our minister with carrying on with these 3 services. So that's also part of the change going forward is thinking about how are we doing this in our new setup in the coming months.
And are you full-time in the parish as well, Michelle, or part-time, or what? Or just a volunteer?
I'm part-time. I was 30 hours pre-pandemic, and then with finances post-pandemic, I'm now 25. So I'm even more, my capacity is reduced as we go. So I do need volunteers. That's very important. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that strikes me talking about the desert areas and the hard places, and then it came up a couple of times in the conversation, people mentioning that the volunteers are thin on the ground and that they're maybe older than they wanted to be. They still want to do it, but they're getting on. And I think that's something that I'm very conscious of, is not just looking at the church and then looking at the community, or trying to grow disciples, but thinking about being kind to those and nurture those that are sheep within our own fold, and to think of us all mattering, and us all, if it's too tough for one person, that person shouldn't be doing it all alone. And so we need to the pandemic's taught us this. We need to be kind to ourselves. We matter to God, so it does matter how we do this, and doing it carefully, slowly, with prayer and love, and not just looking outwardly at love, thinking it's for other people, but thinking of our own congregations and ourselves along that line as well, and making time in Bible study and being fed, going to the spring for our, the source. To, we're not going to dream it up ourselves. It's God's work.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really, really important point. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lynn. I think it's really important, and not to be overwhelmed, and to let go of some stuff, and but to maybe just rethink a few things. Maybe it's just some very small things, some easy wins. But I think one of the other desert places can very often be the Kirk session, which can be very fixed. It's very hard to bring new ideas, or even to get people starting to think about anything. They're very, they've got quite busy agendas very often. And yeah, it's easier to leave things the same sometimes. So I think some of the people that we've been working with, they want to bring in something new, but then they face a bit of a challenge engaging the Kirk session and getting kind of opportunities. And I think, Michelle, you shared a story that you just tried things as a trial. Let's just try this for a short time and see. So to kind of take small steps, if you like, and then to try and help people to see what works for everybody, and the give and take that's needed, I think, is a really important principle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely need to have enthusiastic supporters amongst your Kirk session to help encourage everyone else to see the need for cultural change as well, which is very important.
And I think sometimes it's
go ahead, Margaret.
No, I was just going to say, uncertainty makes things difficult. I mean, we've moved beyond uncertainty because, we haven't had been allowed to call a minister for 2.5 years. And at the beginning, we were always thinking somebody will come. But now, I think over time, we've realized that we just have to move on, and you can't wait, and you just have to do the best you can with what you've got. And as you said, Lynn, especially in times of uncertainty, you need to be good to other people, to the whole community of people who are working away in a bit of uncertainty.
Yeah. Mm. And I think COVID, we changed an awful lot of things. Yeah. When you don't have a minister, you maybe have to let go of some things that you just can't keep going in the same way as you once did. When you're a very small, very rural church, you maybe have to use change as a good thing, to do good new things slightly differently, just to make it easier. So maybe change and new things are one of God's ways of bringing those new streams in to make things a bit easier than constantly feeling we've just got to keep the show on the road and the pews filled and do things the same as we've always done. That sometimes is just puts too much of a burden on us. And maybe that's where God's saying, actually, some of this change is good. Some of these new things, open your eyes, get hold of it. There's new things that I want to bless you and those around you with. If you can just step into them, you will see that new life, and it'll be easier for us. So, yeah. Well, just noticing the time. We've had some really useful conversation, and we've recognised, we've been in a very rapidly changing world, society, the lives of children, and our church. We're in a particularly challenging time of change now. But there's lots of opportunities, lots of seeds, lots of really good things happening that can help young people, children, families engage with faith, share the love of Jesus with everybody. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your stories and that example from Portobello. Now, Michelle's going to just close us with the closing prayer, and I'll send you some links and some information as a follow-up after this email. And it will also, the recording will be online on the Church of Scotland website next week. So let's just pray.
So the prayer I'm going to close this with is an adaptation of the prayer we used in our 10:30 worship. So you can see one of our prayers. And it was adapted from this book by Claire Benton Evans. She's got 2 books on how to do interactive prayers with all groups. And it's really lovely, so I recommend that as well. So sometimes the simplest actions communicate better than words. And sometimes we don't even have the words to express our prayers to God. But God hears us anyhow. God knows our hearts. And if someone stands in front of you with their hands cupped like this, you understand exactly what they mean and what they're waiting for. They're waiting to receive something, which they hope and expect you will give. So we're going to use this gesture in our prayers today. Make yourself as comfortable as you can. Maybe for you that's sitting down, maybe it's leaning forward, maybe it's standing, whatever is the best position for you. And simply hold your hands like an empty bowl, asking God for guidance for you and your ministry going forward. And then rest quietly in God's presence for a moment, waiting for whatever He may give. Let's pray. Holy Lord, may we always hold open a space in our lives so that you may fill it with your grace and your guidance. In this season of Lent and this season of renewal, we ask that you renew our spirits, renew our energy, renew our strength, renew our creativity, and renew our capacity as we seek to renew children's and youth ministry in our churches. Amen.